Most of the world used to be extremely religious, and that is why most of them started from a biblical point of view, with Noah and his sons repopulating the earth. It was a convenient place to start. You did not have to start at Adam and Eve because the world was once destroyed. So we will watch a video about this and see exactly what is said in the Bible and why they believe this. Now, again, we have to take this very seriously because I'm going to look at before 800 AD. A lot of people believe that this hypothesis of Ham turning black is something that happened today in the 1900s, 1800s, 1700s, but it's something that goes all the way back. And you know that it was copied for a couple reasons. As the story goes, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem is one of the good brothers. Ham is one of the bad brothers. And Japheth is one of the best brothers. Ham, in the story, is cursed to be black and to be part of the slave territories. Shem is revenge cursed by Ham, and he turns slightly dark, but not darker than Japheth, and Japheth remains the lightest. This idea is championed by the Muslims in the early years. One of the stupid things about it is that the Bible doesn't even mention Ham turning dark. They just added that part for no reason. So this is the actual verse. It says, "The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them the whole earth was populated. Noah, a man of the soil, began to plant a vineyard when he drank some of the wine. He got drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers who were outside. Shem and Japheth took the garments and placed on their shoulders. Then they walked backwards and covered up their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his drunken stupor, he learned what his youngest son had done to him. So he said, 'Cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves. He will be to his brothers.' He also said, 'Worthy of praise is the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slaves of Shem. May God enlarge Japheth's territory and numbers. May he live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be the slave of Japheth.' Now, as you can see there is no mention of his skin color or Canaan's skin color changing. But somehow this hypothesis of the skin color of Ham representing all the black people suddenly grew within the Islamic world and took over. This is disputed several times by different Muslim scholars who were looking for the information but could not find it.
Everything of value ever found in Africa was brought there by the Hamitics, allegedly a branch of the Caucasian race. Were the original inhabitants of Africa white? Now, this obviously flies in the face of everything we know about the origins of humanity.
Now, this is where things get interesting because they claim that Noah turned Ham black. They now had a convenient excuse to say that human beings started as white, because human beings had started as white and one got cursed to become black, which is not even in the Bible. It seemed like a good excuse to make life start outside of Africa. The religion, even though it had signs that life had started in Africa, even in the Bible, when you look at things like the Garden of Paradise, then they didn't have to take those seriously because Starting with Noah, you have them start somewhere in the Middle East and then moving back into Africa. They tried to explain this by the intermediate zones and say that some people aren't as black as other people, and those are probably the closer sons of Ham. Europeans would later use this to try and say that white people were the first people on earth, and therefore any territory they dominate around the world, they're native to that region anyway.
Being that humans evolved in Africa with dark skin, and as they began to venture out and populate the world, their skin tone adapted more to their new environments, generally becoming lighter. Well, in
So even when it came to evolution, this was not what they wanted to see. So we go from primordial man or primate like man until we get to some kind of human, which is not necessarily what happened. In fact, the thought today is that whatever we evolved from was something in between a primate and a man. But what they hate the most about this, and you can see that they try to force the image, is they skip over the black person. We evolved somewhere in Africa. And the reason why this is very irritating for a lot of them is because the argument is flipped on its head. It means that black people are native to every other place in the world, and therefore it's okay for them in their own argument to colonize the rest of the world since they are native to every continent. So, why then is evolution taken so seriously by so many if it doesn't give them what they want? Well, the answer is very simple. The evidence is overwhelming. This is something that disturbed even the founders of evolution, people like Charles Darwin. But he had to just say the truth and say that he thinks that human beings, like most primates, started somewhere in Africa. And this, again, is something that was believed and is believed by most scientists today. It is the reason why, and I've played many of them, so many people who are on the far right side go against evolution. There is no reason to go against evolution outside of not wanting the black race to be the first. When they were desperately clinging on to religion, they could make tall tales about different areas. Some people started the history somewhere in Babylon in the Tower of Babel, and that's how they explain the many different races. Some people went with Noah, some people went with everything else in order to try and put the origins of man somewhere in the Middle East so that it could be far away from Africa. Others even started with Egypt and said that the races started somewhere there. Unfortunately for them, evolution has completely taken over, and now they're left with desperate attempts to try and downgrade science. These anti scientific people, who are basically tilting at windmills, are left with no exception but to try and return to religion.
In his TEDx talk, Michael Robinson, who's a historian and professor, describes how he started to become aware of lots of stories of white tribes that had been discovered all over the world, from New Zealand to Asia to South America, and of course Africa.
So, what he's talking about here is several writers who, in the 1800s, traveled within the continent of Africa and some on the borders. And when they traveled there, they described seeing tribes who some of them described them as pale and some of them described them as white. Now, this information, which was clearly explained in most of these books, we're talking about tribes that were somewhat lighter than the black people that they found. So, in other words, Khoisan type people and others that were probably mixed with Khoisan. These tribes, by the way, who had also been explained within places like Sofala by people of the Arab race. For example, they describe that in Sofala, there's a group that wears animal skins and they are white and they cultivate the regions. And these people took this to mean that there must have been white people somewhere in Africa, despite the fact that if you go and look yourself, there is no white natives in Africa. What they wanted to do was to claim that these white skinned people, as they've thought, were the original people who had turned black. Now, the problem with this is that even in the Hamitic theory, the Hamites turned black before they even enter Africa. So, what is happening with the people who are described as pale and the people who are described as white? As I mentioned, these people just happen to be lighter skinned. And because of sloppy writing, a lot of these authors, not realizing that people would take what they're saying the wrong way, describe people who are somewhat lighter than the people of the Nilotics and the Bantu people, describing those people as pale.
But to focus on Africa then, in the 1870s, the explorer Henry Morton Stanley visited Lake Victoria, which sort of sits between Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And he was there in search of the source of the river Nile, something that there's never really been any consensus about. Whilst he was there, he had a group of soldiers with him who were basically his protection. And he noticed that some of them looked as if they had white skin. It was said that this particular tribe of white soldiers were from somewhere off in the distance up in the mountains.
So I want to describe something first before we carry on. First of all, Henry Morton Stanley was not the first white person to arrive here. He's not even the first foreign person from Africa to arrive here. And Africans, as described by earlier people, took great interest in going up and down the Nile, and they had already known about these trips. So let's first start with that information. The information, by the way, again, of white people being found in or by Lake Victoria is something that even Henry Morton Stanley himself clarified, that he was literally talking about lighter skinned Africans.
Now, I just want to point out at this stage that Michael Robinson's explanation for this is that most likely they weren't actually a white tribe at all, but more likely just a more light-skinned people than Henry Morton Stanley was expecting to see. But
So, this is the interesting part. So, everybody says that Henry Morton Stanley was not expecting to see black people that are that light. This is something that happens for a lot of people who have never been to Africa. In their head, black people are super dark. And of course, if you start with that idea, then when you get to Africa, you will be shocked. Now, we will read the verse of Henry Morton Stanley. And of course, there are several other people, Europeans, we can read, like the people who went to the Kingdom of Congo, who also express the difference between skin color of the Northern Africans. So, in other words, West Africans, Nubians, and Moors, and other people that they found in Northern Africa, versus the skin color of the people found in the lower places like Congo or Angola or even East Africa.
he described them as white, and word was sent back home. But he needed some way of explaining, almost rationalizing, what it was that he had seen. Ultimately, trying to find an answer to the question of how these groups of white people ended up in some of the most remote parts of Africa. Well, this is where he turned to the story of Noah. Of course,
The story of Noah, even in the scientific world, was one of those things that was just believed because most of the people were Christian at this time, and the ones that weren't were Muslim, which didn't help because they also believed in this idea. And so the story of Noah was just taken as fact by a lot of people. And because of this, they clearly believed that there was something different. But again, we will go back to what is the tribe that they consider Europeans or white people.
according to the Bible, Noah built an ark that he would use to save 2 of each species from the flood, or 7 of each depending on the animal. But after the flood, these animals would all need to be used to repopulate the earth. And of course, humans would need to do their bit too. So Noah gave that job to 3 of his sons, Sem, Japheth, and Ham. In particular, it was Ham's job to repopulate Africa. And of course, because pretty much everyone in the Bible is seen as white, particularly through a European lens, these new white tribes that had been found in Africa were very quickly seen as the direct descendants of Ham. And
now, this map is simplified by Europeans, but in real life, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth theory is actually more complicated than this. In this, they make it seem one directional, one to Europe, one to Asia, and one to Africa. But we will read Muslim writers who will give a completely different story, although it is also born of this lie.
they became known as the Hamites, hence this theory being dubbed the Hamitic hypothesis. In fact, Ham's descendants being the original inhabitants of Africa was a very popular belief way back in the Middle Ages, so at least 400 years before Henry Morton Stanley. But the notion of race wasn't something that was particularly important to them back then. It only became relevant once Stanley began to connect the dots. So how did this change the view of Africa? Well, by this point, transatlantic slavery was technically over, but just a few years after Stanley's trip, we see the official start of colonialism, which went from around 1884 up until about 1914.
So the dates he's giving is the start of colonialism. It carried on way further after that. In fact, really, colonialism started to crumble in the 60s, 1960s.
General vibe of white supremacy in that black people were inferior to white people was very well established and is obviously one that drove colonialism at its heart. But this idea of the Hamitic hypothesis only encouraged it. The notion that white people were the original inhabitants of Africa essentially meant that white Europeans basically had the right to go there and do whatever they wanted, and thus began the scramble for Africa. This period of just over 30 years where Africa was essentially seized by Western European powers, colonized and divided amongst them.
It's important to note that even people who did not believe in the Hamitic hypothesis still believed in colonizing Africa. And so, again, we can see that this is a convenient excuse, but it's not necessarily the reason that they did this. But they felt aided by this thought.
Robinson then explains that at some point there was a complete switch in thinking. As scientific thought began to catch up with religion, it was then hypothesized that, yes, black people were in fact the original inhabitants of Africa, but that Africa, and the world as a whole really, must have been the subject of what he calls an invasion of white people. So thousands of years ago, way before colonialism, there was apparently a sudden drive of white exploration and settlement across the world, similar to how early humans set out from Africa, across the Middle East and into Europe and Asia. Now this would explain why all of these white tribes were suddenly being discovered all over the place. So let's work out where we are so far.
So, as you can see, even though they're going against religion, they're still trying to find a way to put Europeans or white people back into Africa.
There are apparently these white people in Africa and we don't know how they got there. Maybe they're the direct descendants of Ham, which, yeah, is probably looking a little bit sketchy. Or maybe they're the descendants of ancient invaders. Or maybe they're not even white, who knows? But this is where it gets, and I'm going to be honest, pretty unbelievable.
So before we move on to the next part, let's first discuss these white people described by Henry Morton Stanley. So you can see here, he discusses someone called Mtesa. Mtesa is a native chief who is married to several women. And Henry Morton Stanley is surprised by his taste in females, as there are people there which he describes as looking like Europeans. So let's read it. But Mtesa apparently differs widely from Europeans in his tastes. There were not more than 20 out of all of the 500 worthy of the glance of admiration from a white man with an eye for style and beauty, and certainly not more than 3 deserving of many glances. These 3, the most comely among the 20 beauties of Mtesa's court, were of the Wahuma race, no doubt from Ankori. They had the complexion of quadroons, were straight-nosed and thin-lipped, with large lustrous eyes. In the other graces of a beautiful form they excelled, and Hafiz might have said the poetic rapture that they were straight as palm trees and beautiful as moons. The only drawback was their hair, the short, crisp hair of the Negro race, but in all other points they might be exhibited as the perfection of beauty which Central Africa can produce. Mtesa, however, does not believe them to be superior or even equal to his well fleshed, unctuous bodied, flat nosed wives. Indeed, when I pointed them out to him one day at a private audience, he even regarded them with a sneer. Speck, if I remember rightly, declares that the fatness in womankind is synonymous with beauty in Uganda. This may once have been the case, but it is certainly not so now, for in few women regarded with favor by Mtese or his chiefs have I seen any gross corpulence of body. Naturally, where there's is abundance of good digested food and the climate is agreeable, humanity of the respectable class will generally be found to be well clothed in flesh, be it in Uganda or in England. But it is somewhat unreasonable to state that the respectable class therefore considers superfluous rotundity to be the element of beauty. When speaking again of the Wahumi and Mtese, he mentions that Almas is rendered and means diamond, succeeded Chimera and the hunter. The king's name is the favorite one among the Arabs, which I take to be further evidence that the founder of the Uganda monarchy had Asiatic blood in his veins. So again, you're seeing him claiming that the people of Uganda have some kind of foreignness about them, which makes them look the way they look. So there is a word that Henry Morton Stanley uses to describe some of these white people. And one of the words he uses is Wahuma. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of the names that Stanley Morton uses are still around today. The Bahuma or Wahuma are still found in Uganda today. Are you ready to come face to face with these white people described by Henry Stanley Morton? Now, I don't want you guys to get offended because we're about to look at some white people. Everybody, look at the screen and calm down. These are the Wahuma of Uganda. These are the apparent white people that prove this hypothesis. It's fair to say that they are lighter skinned than Africans in general, but to change these to be Asiatic is desperate at best. But it doesn't stop there. We can go even further. So it says in Henry Morton Stanley's book, following this little army, there were about 500 women and children, giving a grand total of nearly 2,800 souls. With Colonel Sakajugu were four men of Gambaragara who were of remarkably light complexion, approaching to that of dark faced Europeans, who differed altogether in the habits and manners from the Waganda. They possessed their own millage cows, and their diet appeared to consist entirely of milk. The features of these people, besides their complexion, were so regular and remarkable that my curiosity was aroused to the highest pitch concerning them. I had seen stray representatives of these people at the court of Mtesa, but I had not the opportunity then that I have now to inquire definitely about them. I here set down as I was told what I gathered respecting them, both from their own lips and those of Colonel Sakajugu, who was the best informed of the Waganda. These light complexioned, regular featured people are natives of Gambagara, a country situated between Usongora and Unyuru. Gambagaragara embraces all the immediate districts neighboring the base of the lofty Mount Gordon Bennett, upon the summit of which snow is often seen. He then describes the landscape and then returns to describing the race and says, "The people are a peculiar formed race. At one time, they are said to have been all white and to have immigrated from northern Unyuru, but at the present time, the black and light complexioned are about equal in numbers. The blacks are the result of successive wars during ancient times and intermarriage between the captors and captives, the result being a singularly long limbed and slender bodied people. The royal family and the chiefs' families continue to preserve their exclusiveness, and hence it is the original color of the founders of the states has been preserved. The women are said to have been singularly beautiful. I have seen several of them, and though I would not call them beautiful, as we understand in term in Europe and America, they are superior to any woman I have seen in Africa and have nothing to in common with Negroes except the hair. So before I reveal who these people are, I will explain that if you go on the internet, there's a whole bunch of people who go around talking about the Gambaragara, a mysterious white race that exists somewhere in Uganda. And these people somehow disappeared. It's of great interest to some people. Now, of course, most people have never even read the original story. So we're given enough clues of who these people are. One, they're said to be related to the Wahuma, which I already talked about and showed who they were. He says that we saw a bit of these people in the tribe earlier. That tribe is related to another greater tribe, and that's how we know that this is who he was referring to. Not only that, he describes them as having Negro hair and being of the Negro race, though looking like Europeans in all other ways. Without the smallest doubt in my mind, the people that he's talking about is the Angole or Banyangole. This Bantu tribe represents a tall, slender people compared to the pygmy tribes in which he is probably talking about of the dark races. These people, especially the women, because that's who he obsesses over, are taller than the general pygmies found in Gambaragara or Mount Spec. In Mount Spec, we find tons of pygmies of very dark complexion. He describes these people as taller, thinner, with longer faces, which of course we can see. I have compared these people before to the ancient Egyptians, which we will talk about some other time. What is really happening here is that, and this is why he obsesses about talking about the woman, is that he finds himself attracted to a race that he thought he would find nothing attractive in. And also, he's running into something called the diversity of Africa. And when he runs into it, he finds a way out to say, actually, it's not because the Negroes have beautiful people that he did not expect, but instead, it's because they're not really Negroes. So I was going to compare these people to the people found in Angola and other places, but I've already spent enough time on this. Um, it's easy to say that these light skinned people belong to some kind of Hermetic thing, which was made up. What really happened is that they ran into something they did not expect, and so they started throwing their theories, and that failed.
Colonialists would look at some of the amazing architectural achievements in Africa, the ruins of the city of Great Zimbabwe, and of course the Great Pyramids in Egypt. Let's be honest, one of the things that makes the pyramids so fascinating today is that we can't know for sure exactly how they were built, but the Europeans knew, white people did it. The apparent presence.
So, unexpectedly, what happened by this time is that, and you will realize this, a lot of civilizations, a lot of people, civilization, cultivated lands of below the equator were unknown up until this point. and by the Europeans. And when they ran into them, instead of saying what great civilizations Africans could build, they just chopped it down to, oh, it's these obvious Asiatic or white people who basically are admixed and therefore they are of the Hamitic and they built these entire civilization. They didn't care that these people were dotted all around Africa and would not make sense to just be isolated in certain regions like Zimbabwe, Angola, Congo, Uganda, and certain places, even the Swahili coast. They then separated these people into even smaller groups. Ethiopia, of course, is another one.
Of Caucasians in Africa suddenly provided an explanation as to how these amazing structures were built. There's no way black people would have had the intelligence, the understanding of materials, or even just the ability to make something that amazing. Which, if you watch my video on Mansa Musa, you'll know is completely untrue. In fact, even if you did.
When this video is done, we're going to look into some of the people. So some of the people in West Africa, a lot of the time people like to refer to some of the mixedness of the modern black Africans, and they want to blame that for the civilizations. But we will talk about this again when this video is over, which is 1 minute left.
Watch that video, I would hope that you know that that's not true. But now that we know that white people are here, and were maybe even here first, it all makes perfect sense. In fact, the actual claim made by the Hamitic hypothesis is that everything of value ever found in Africa was brought there by the Hamitics, allegedly a branch of the Caucasian race. So
of course, we know people like Robert Sapir and others who try to put this out there, even claiming that Mansa Musa was a white person. He is not making that stuff up completely. He's not that creative. He is stealing from the Hermetic hypothesis. The people who are believing him, too, are familiar with the Hermetic hypothesis, which is why they go there.
with all of this behind them, whether we're talking about the white Hamitics being in Africa first or the white settlers building the pyramids, great job they did, by the way, it gave an excuse to conquer, to almost reclaim what they thought was theirs to begin with. Now, whether they actually believed this or whether it was just one of the ways they justified it to themselves, I don't know. But very quickly, we see this scramble for Africa taking place. To me, it seems clear they knew very well how much value Africa held intrinsically.
So this part is absolutely true. There would be no reason for them to have any real value in Africa or claim the civilizations unless they thought that the civilizations were better than what they had expected.
There's obviously that famous quote by Leopold II of Belgium: "I do not want to miss a chance of getting us a slice of this magnificent African cake." And he famously seized the Congo for Belgium, right in the heart of Africa. So it wasn't about reclaiming anything that was rightfully theirs, it was just about greed and status. In a nutshell then, the Hamitic hypothesis was born out of pre-existing racial prejudice and was used to further the mission of subjugating Africa and Africans. After this, throughout the rest of the 20th century, Africa slowly began to regain its independence from these European powers. But the effects have been long-lasting, and the perceptions of the continent as uncivilized and lesser is something that has continued to persist into the modern day. And changing those perceptions is, of course, the point of this channel. So if you're on board, go ahead and hit subscribe. I mentioned Mansa Musa earlier in this video, and if you don't know about his incredible story, then I really recommend you go and check that one out next. I'll see you over there.
So now we're going to go back in the past when the Africans ruled without any influence from others. In fact, their territories were really unknown by the Asiatics. Only a few people had allegedly ventured into those regions. We're going to round about 800 AD. So now we have to go back, way, way back, more than 1,000 years back. When we look at al-Bakri, we see that in Ghana, there are mosques and things like that. This is an indication that there are obviously some influences from the Middle East or North Africa. But here's the thing. Al-Bakri is not the oldest writer of the Kingdom of Ghana. This goes to Akbar Ezaman, a book written in collaboration by many Muslim authors, aided also by al Masudi. Akbar Ezaman is the book, which, by the way, is not complete. This book was an encyclopedia in the past that featured so much information that it barely sold. The book that would follow this is Al Masudi's book, which talks about different parts of Africa. This sold very well, cementing Al Masudi as a great writer. But let's go to Akbar as Zaman. This book could not have been written later than 850 AD. It's actually thought that it's possible that this book predates the birth of Al Masudi, and this is why it's one of the most complicated books, because there are some contributions by Al Masudi in it. And if this is possible, then this is a multi generational book. In it, they talk about all manner of things, religion, culture, but then they mention the black tribes and then the Negro tribes. You may find this slightly confusing, but you won't once I read this. So, this is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, description of the Ham, Shem, and Japheth idea. Before we read this, I want to make sure we understand what Akbar Ezaman is. So it says here, we have described the mines of silver, gold, quicksilver, and the places where all sorts of perfumes are found in our work, the Akbar Ezaman. This is from Al Masudi's book. Notice how he says, in our work, not in my work. Although he had never gone to West Africa, contributors in this book went there and wrote about what they found. And you can see that he himself, still talking about Akbar Zaman, says, may therefore dispense with entering further on this subject in this book. The accounts which are reported respecting the Sea of the West, which is called the Green Sea, which are reported respected the Sea of the West, are marvelous, particularly those which regard the sea that washes the cultivated districts of the Sudan and the extreme West. Men who possessed of an extensive knowledge of our globe say the Abyssinians and Sudan occupy a country of 7 years' journey, that Egypt forms the 60th part of the country of Sudan, and that the country of Sudan forms only a small portion of the surface of the earth, the dimensions of which is 500 years' journey. So we will be looking at the Black and Negro tribes that are described. But first, what we need to do is read the Ham, Shem, and Japheth idea. Now remember, we have read the original text. There is no description of anyone turning black. Instead, they're cursed to be slaves, which is something that happens everywhere in the world. So you cannot put that on any particular race. Not to mention that later writers write that not only does this not make sense, but it was the direct children that were cursed, not the entire generations. So let's continue to read. So it says here in the Akbar Zaman, Noah divided the land between his children, giving Shem possession of the middle of the earth, the sacred territory and its surrounding, Yemen up to Hadramat, and up to Oman, Bahrain, until Alij, and up the border of India. The whole country was covered with towns, villages, fortresses, palaces, various buildings, orchards, which were touching each other, until God became irritated with the race of Hud, overthrew almost all the homes. God imbued the race of Shem with prophecy and blessing. The Ham, Noah gave a part of it to Syria, Egypt, the upper Nile, and the land of Nubia, the Buja, the territory of the Negroes, bounded by the Green Sea, this is the Atlantic Ocean, to the land of Abyssinia, Hind, Nut, and Sind. Sind is India. He gave Japheth the countries of the Turks, China, Gog and Magog, Slavs, Rumis, Franks, Lombards, Spanish, to the shores of the Dark Sea. So the Dark Sea is basically the Atlantic Ocean, but on the other side. Joktan was given the land from China to the land of Ash-Shahar to the borders of Yemen. Humans multiplied first on the all sides, spread themselves out around Babylon, and dwelt there. They built more than 70,000 houses, which were overcrowded with people. Iblis then ignited discord among them. Iblis is the name for Satan. Language confusion came, and they dispersed. In the Akbar as Zaman, as we will read, there is no space for white Hamitic people, as the first person to become brown is the first child of Ham and his daughter. Ham refuses to have more children, and these people continue to grow. And as they grow, they keep spreading the darkness. So, as we read here, the children of Ham, son of Noah, the traditionalists say that Noah cursed Ham, asking God that his descendants should be ugly and black, and they were subjected to serving the progeny of Shem. He had the son after Canaan, Cush, who was black. He wanted to approach his wife. Shem tried to stop him by reminding him of his father's curse hanging over him. Ham was angry. Satan fomented discord between the brothers and pitted one against the other. In the end, Ham had to flee to Egypt. His children were scattered, and he continued his journey westward till he came back to Sus al Aqsa, the place known today as Asila in Morocco. This is the lost port of the Sea of Spain, to which ships might arrive coming from the direction of Qibla. One cannot pass beyond it. Now, what's interesting is these black people are associated not only with the Negroes that we will find, but also with ancient Egypt, the Berbers, and all the others. So we will read. It is said that the sons of Ham, repenting for having abandoned their father, sought out a place where he lived, and they advanced in the direction he had taken. To find him, they say some discovered it and stayed with him until his death. After securing this country, they gave rise to the Negro races. Each family of Ham's descendants began to search for him, then stopped in the place where they dwelt. Without having learned his whereabouts, and they multiplied, Ham was not seen again by his own children. After his death, some of those who lived with him left the country and settled in the current country of the Berbers. He died at the age of 441 years old. His children buried him in a cave in the mountains of Asila. So, this will be the last part we will read about the Ham, and then we will go to the civilizations as they describe them. Canaan was the eldest son of Ham. He was the first whom Iblis made to abandon the religion of Noah. It is from him that the enmity between his race and that of the son of his grandfather dates. The giant and the Canaanite who lived in Syria were his descendants. They also associate them with the pharaohs of Egypt and Goliath, whom David slew, as well as the Amalekites, were sons of Ham, and Canaanites that fought Moses and Joshua were sons of Nun after him. It is of them that God spoke in this verse. There are in this land a people born of giants. Their size was very mighty indeed. It is claimed that Canaan the younger is one of the ones who established Syria and Mesopotamia. So you can see already it's not just insulting one group, but an entire landscape. Again, starting from Syria, going all the way to Spain, southern Spain, and then the whole of Africa and even India. So the first kingdom that they talk about is the kingdom of Wagadu. Some people say that the word Ghana meant warrior and was not the original name of this empire. I dispute this. I think that the word Ghana they got from the kingdom being called Ghana in the original times. Now, I want to state a couple things. You see this that the person who's documenting these African names is not just making up names, he's getting them from the people himself. I think also the empire is much bigger than this, and the reason why it is because of what is described. So let us read exactly what is described of the kingdom of Ghana in the oldest book provided, Ekbar Ez Zaman. So, by the way, this is pre Islamic Ghana. So it says the kingdom of Ghana is still a powerful state. It touches the land of gold mines, where reside several branches of family of Sudan. The people of this country have demarcated a boundary we cannot cross when venturing there to buy gold. So we have some general indicators here. First, we have the land that is thought to possess a lot of gold, which, by the way, some of these include Upper Niger, so close to Algeria. Tagaza is another one. Wadan, Ijil, these places would be part of the Ghana Empire. This is much bigger than what is shown in those empires. In fact, it's almost the size of the Mali Empire. But what's more interesting is the power of this empire, because you can see here it says the people of this country have demarcated a boundary we cannot cross when venturing there to buy gold. So, in other words, they have put the boundary and said to these Muslims, you're not allowed to go any further than this. But what are the consequences? Well, let's read. When buyers approach this line, they set out their lots of merchandise and apparel and go away. The blacks arrive with gold, leave a certain amount of goods to one side, and go away. The owners of lots come back, and if they are not satisfied, they go again. The Negroes come back in turn and add to the gold, and so on, until the trade is complete. It's exactly the same process employed by the merchants who go to buy cloves. Sometimes the traders, after leaving, return secretly and make fires on the earth, since the soil in this country is a pure gold mine. They take the gold that collects at the bottom and flee. But often they are assaulted by the locals who chase after them, overtake them, and massacre them. In the desert of the kingdom, there are mines of Esba Disham, yellow amethyst. They are abundant enough to appear as tracks streaked on the sand. Traders have reported that gold is struck in the city of Sigilimasa. Now, for those of you that don't know, I will point out just how high Sigilimasa is in North Africa. This is a big city with 4 mosques and a street that takes half a day to travel. One can see there a great number of palm trees. It is here that the dinar is struck. The king of Ghana has under his control several kings and several realms, in all of which gold appears on the earth's surface. The people of this kingdom collect it and work it into ingots. We cannot know for sure, but the kingdom of Ghana seems to extend very close to Sigil Masa. So the next race that is mentioned, a Negro race, which is part of the kingdom of Demdem. This is a unknown kingdom. We have no idea which location it is. We know that it's on the Atlantic Ocean. So either Mauritania or on the other side of Mauritania. This name will come up again when we talk about crossing the Atlantic Ocean or the Green Sea. So, as it says, among the known races of the people is also the one which lives in the kingdom of Demdem. This kingdom which is the country of Kuku along the sea, is on the west of the aforementioned. So, in other words, it's on the west of the kingdom of Ghana. The tribes fight against each other. They are cannibals, and they have a powerful king who has several others subjoined to him. In this country, there is a large rock with the appearance of a woman that people revere and to which they come in pilgrimage. Later Arab sources like Al Idrisi puts these in the Senegambia regions. So, in other words, where today there would be Dakrur, there would be basically all the Senegambian regions. So this is the only thing that they explain about this place. Now remember, the reason why they can't explain more, even though in later books they will start explaining the buildings and stuff that are there in that region, the reason they can't explain more is because the Ghana are not allowing them to move further inland. And the Kingdom of Ghana, as noted here, is not as westernly as most people put it. It seems like the Kingdom of Ghana starts somewhere in Niger. So the next part is very important because it tells us the extension of the Ghana Empire, because the next part does that goes to the east of the Kingdom of Ghana does not stop very close to West Africa. Instead, it goes to the Fezzan region. So what you're looking at here is bitumen. Bitumen is what is used on roads. Also, it's what's filtered to create gasoline and many other things that you will see. This type of substance is used in the empire that we're about to look at. Now, I remember mentioning this before, but I could not remember what empire it was in that I said that the stuff that today we use in cars and other stuff was discovered long time ago by different ancient peoples, but also African people. And this is it. So it says, the kingdom of Fezin is a powerful kingdom where one can travel for many days. There is bitumen found in wells, mobile as quicksilver. These wells all open in the same country, the extent of which is half a mile, and which is dominated by a palace. The people of this country exploit the bitumen and call the place where it is found Marawa of the Sahara. The Fezzan Empire, which gives its name to the modern Fezzan region, is known as the land of the Garamantes, first and foremost. It starts off to the east of Algeria and then ends in Libya, as we can see on this map. So you can see Fezzan and then Cyrenaica and then Egypt. So the Fezzan region is a very interesting one, and the Fezzan Empire is an interesting one. And the fact that I have a palace there that is described, one, that this palace that is described is probably due to how close it is to that area. And so the people who come through have seen a palace in this Negro population. This would be consistent, by the way, with what the earlier writers say about the Garamantes being a Negro race. Now, what's even more interesting is that they're moving down the line. So from the Fezzan, you get to the kingdom of Nubia, and they will still continue to mention the Fezzan. So it says the kingdom of Nubia, they are inhabited by the descendants of Nuba, son of Kut, son of Misar, son of Ham. Indeed, when their grandfather came to Egypt with Misar, Misar died, and his son remained in the country. His successor, Cobton, established the Copts in Egypt. They are descendants of Copton, son of Misar. Copton married his sister. His children were scattered throughout the country and founded kingdoms. Nub, son of Kut, ascended the Nile with his people and his family and his descendants settled on the banks. Their capital is Dongola. Their land is full of palm trees and cereals. Its width is a 2 month journey. The Copts are Christians of the Jacobite sect. So you can see here that basically they're putting the Copts, the Egyptians, the Nubians into one bag. And they're saying that their capital is in Dongola. Now, remember the claim that is made here. Misr, which means Egypt, Copt, which is the Copts, and then Nubia are said to be the same race. Of course, they've already been claimed to be black by being the son of Ham. But let's go even further than that. So we have here Dongola, right? This is Nuba. Why are they going this far away from the Fezzan region? Well, we will get to that. But it's because of how big the empires were, but we will get to it specifically. By this time, of course, Dongola was still Christian and there was no real attempts made by Muslims to take over. So he carries on. The second kingdom of Nubia, it lies in the region of Upper Egypt. It is larger and more powerful than the first, and its people have a lighter complexion. It takes 3 months to cross its capital in Suya. Its inhabitants are Christian. They are very rich and have beautiful clothes and valuable rings. Gold also can be found there on the ground. They also have palm trees and cities. They are divided into several tribes, with kings occupying a large country. So you see here again, Upper Egypt dominated by black Nubians. It's interesting that even in 800 AD, if that's when this book was written, that, or at least this part of the book was written, that they still are talking about these Nubians being independent of the Muslims, being Christian, a greater empire than that of the lower Nubians or the Nubians in Sudan. We go even further and they talk about the Buja, the kingdom of Buja in Ethiopia. It follows Nubia. It is divided into many kingdoms, which are located between the Nile and the sea, and each has a king. The kingdoms of Buja begin at the limits of the Sudan, and they are the last Muslim province. So you can see here, these Buja are at the limits of the Islamic world. Their capital is called Hajar. The inhabitants are divided into tribes. They have gold and emerald mines, and their countries. They live in peace with Muslims, and Muslims work with them in the mines. Further still are still more kingdoms and cities. So we're going even lower now. These people have as their neighbors the Abyssinians, who are descendants of Habash. So you can imagine how big the kingdom is. So basically, the Beja found just north of the Sudan, and then going all the way down, travel through with the Red Sea all the way till you get to Ethiopia. That is a large territory. So we carry on. It says, these people have for neighbors the Abyssinians, who are descendants of Habash, son of Cush, son of Ham. The largest Abyssinian kingdom is that of the Negus, to which many other kingdoms are subject and pay tribute. Negus is Christian. The name of the capital is Kobar or Ankobar. Since ancient times, the Arabs have come to trade with that country. So we have three kingdoms left of Africa, and then they go into India and places like that, which we'll talk about in a different day. So we carry on. The Abyssinians border the Zanj, located on the shore of the Salt Sea, and whose kingdom is extensive. So the Salt Sea is the Indian Ocean. They descended from Sudan, son of Canaan, and they also have several kings and kingdoms. Their principal king is called Kuna. He resides on the shore of the sea in the place called Kandu. These Zanj file their teeth until they become very thin. They have large mouths and very white teeth in front because they eat lots of fish. They have elephants whose tusks they sell to traders from neighboring countries. They own islands where they collect shells with which they adorn themselves, or which they sell. They are divided into several tribes spread among several kingdoms. So far, you've probably heard of all the tribes that I'm speaking of, but here's one you've probably never heard of. The Kirk. This is the nation that descends from Sudan, son of Canaan. It is close to the people of Sind and Zanj and has them for enemies. The Kirk are strong and tall men with long hair, beautiful faces, and learned in the art of war. They have a king called Naxa, a very powerful ruler who has several others under his rule. They follow the religion of idols that came to them from the people of Sind and Hind. Now I can tell, but we can have more context clues, that basically they're talking about the people of Madagascar. So now that we've discussed the obvious empires, it's important to discuss the Green Sea, which is known as the Atlantic. In order to discuss the sea, what we have to talk about is, so we need to look at this map very carefully. So you can see that the sea is surrounding the entirety of Africa. So Africa at this point was thought to extend all the way south. Now this is Al Idrisi. This is hundreds of years later. Before this, they did believe in a similar theory, just a little different. Now the sea you can see is surrounding the entire world. A comparison to this was describing it as a grape floating in a bowl. So that's what they looked at the continents as. It's something you can think about in your head. The Canaries were thought to be the most westernly cultivated lands. So lands where we absolutely know people were living. But again, there are stories that travel west of the Green Sea. Let's start with Al Masudi, of course, with his mention of Akbar as Zaman. So before I read the next part, we have to understand what the Pillars of Hercules are. The Pillars of Hercules, this narrow region, is thought to be the end of the Mediterranean Sea and where the Green Sea starts, or the Atlantic Ocean. For those of you that don't recognize it, this is in that region right there. So Al Masudi describes this. On the limits where there's these two seas, the Mediterranean and the ocean joined pillars of copper and stone, have been erected by the king Heracles the giant. Upon these pillars are inscriptions and figures which show with their hands that one cannot go further and that it is impractical to navigate beyond the Mediterranean into the sea, the ocean, for no vessels sail on it. There is no cultivation, nor a human being, and the sea has no limits, neither in its depth nor extent, for its end is unknown. This is the Sea of Darkness, also called the Green Sea, or the Surrounding Sea. Some say that these pillars are not on this strait, but in some island of the ocean and their coast. So they're saying that the pillars could also, which were described in ancient times by the ancient Greeks, could also be maybe on the Canaries or an island even further. Some people consider this sea as the origin of all others. So in other words, they're trying to say that instead of being the end of the Mediterranean, it could be the start of other islands that you see. They say some people describe it, and this is where it gets interesting. There are some wonderful stories related respecting it, for which we refer to the reader our book, the Akbar as Zaman. There he will find an account of those crews who have risked their lives in navigating the sea. So you can already see great interest in 800 AD to travel past the Green Sea. So the Atlantic Ocean, there are people who are trying to go through it, and who of them have escaped and who have been shipwrecked. Also, what they have encountered and seen, such as an adventurer, was a Moor of Spain of the name Koshkash. He was a young man of Cordoba. Having assembled some young men, they went on board a vessel which they had ready on the ocean, and nobody knew for a long time what had become of them. At length they came back loaded with rich booty. Their history is well known among the people of Al Andalus. So this story is from the Akbar Examen. You will not find this story in the Akbar Examen because there's parts of it that are missing, but you will find other characters in Akbar Examen, someone called Alexander, who also travels the Black Sea and the Green Sea. So here they describe the external sea. This external sea is joined by the Green Sea and the Black Sea. So we will read the important parts that are geographical. Most of it here is mythological. You can see they talk about the devil and how they talk about it, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, long fish, each of several days, of wonderful aspects, various shapes and colors in all its hues. Cities float in the water, which flee from sailors. So again, they're talking about the different seas in the region. And then it says, as if she were giving it an order to those who come near her to move, the second green raising her hands, extending as if she meant to point or where one needs to go. The third, black with curly hair, pointing to the sea, as if to say, he who disregards will be wrecked. She wears on her chest the inscriptions, work of Abraha Dul Maner, the Hammerite. So you can see here that basically, when they're describing the outer sea, there's a lot of guesswork. And finally, they say the Black Sea made of pitch joins the outer sea. It is very fetid. There, one may find the citadel of silver that some say is artificial and others natural. So here is one of the stories of a crossing of the Atlantic, and what they see on the other side is very interesting. Now, remember, I said I was going to bring back some Africans, which I mentioned earlier. Remember the Demdem? The Demdem, if you remember, are the people found in the Guinea regions, the Senegambia regions. So you can read this if you want, but I'm going to summarize it. So there's a guy who is called Naros, and he is thought to be a person who was ruling in Egypt. And this person wanted to expand his territory so he can make 1 billion Mythgal, or 100 million Mythgal, not 1 billion. He spent too much of his money, and now he went around trying to conquer certain parts of Africa in order so that he can remake the money back. You can see here that he travels with 900,000 men, and he goes to the Berber regions, some Berber tribes. This is on line 6. Some Berber tribes tried to resist him. He devastated their countries. Others asked him for peace and brought gifts. He went from there into Africa and into regions of Cartagena, or Carthaginian. The people asked him for peace at the cost of silver and works of art. He passed and reached the place where the Green Sea enters, the Sea of Rome. So, in other words, he passed the Pillars of Hercules, the Sea of Rome, which is known as the Mediterranean. There he got copper idols, and then he went further, and basically he went back to the Spanish region. So when he got to Spain, The Franks and the Spaniards, the chief of these was called the Lucrid. He fought for days and killed many of his companions. The Spaniards begged him for peace at any cost, high tribute of gold, and promised to pay each year. So basically, this is a person who they alleging went and conquered the whole of North Africa and then went and conquered Spain. In the second part of his journey, Narus heads back to the east, and then he goes to the land of the Berbers, and then from there he goes to the land of Kush. In sentence 3, you can see the land of Cushan, which is a great nation. The people resisted, and he killed many. And then, of course, he goes to the shore of the Dark Sea. The Dark Sea expanding. Then the king of the city. Then he went down, down, carried on, and no one attacked him. And he replied, but as he was traveling through the dark sea, it darkened, and then he had to basically return. From there, he passed into the place of the Negro race. So, in other words, now he's going back west again, and he goes to the Dum Dum or the Dem Dem. These people are the people that they claimed were cannibals. So Senegambian people, which they claim are cannibals, they came out to meet him naked and armed with iron swords. Their king was mounted on a huge horned beast. He was a big with red eyes and fought with great valor. Arayan defeated him and put his people to flight. They hid in the lowlands and covered places in caves and steep mountains where it was impossible to go after them. So before we get to the next part, you can see here it says the general received their presents. He wanted to know if someone had sailed on the sea. So he wants to know if someone has sailed on the dark sea. All of them replied that it was impossible to navigate. And they told him that very often clouds hovered over it and darkened it for days. Later, King Ryan came in person to that place. The people came to meet him, bringing him gifts of fruit and blah, blah, mostly water. So we know that he is talking about the Dark Sea. And so he's trying to go there, whether from the east or the west. But this time he decides to go through the west because the people on the east told him that it's impossible to travel through it. So we can see here, after crossing the country, the king arrived in the nation of monkeys who had very light wings without feathers, by which they flew. Then he embarked on the dark sea. When he had sailed for some time, that sea darkened with clouds. Returning from there to the right, he reached a mountain, Butarus, on the top of which he saw a red stone statue that made a sign of the way that one should return. This statue had written on its chest, "Let no person pass behind me." The king was now near to the city of Copper, but he could not reach it. What he claims he saw on the other side is obviously something that we have to sit and wonder. I mean, already he has thrown a lot of mythology in there. Now, obviously, we know that there are several things that could easily be made up about this story, but still, it is an interesting one. So, what did he claim he saw? Well, let's see. He says, he passed into the valley of darkness, where he heard a great noise, and where he saw nothing because of the intensity of the darkness. He kept walking in the came to the valley of the sand at the end, and he saw an idol bearing the names of the kings and who there before him. And he set up an idol on which he engraved his name. After he crossed the valley sand, he went into the desert adjoining the black sea of darkness. There he heard screams and roars, and advanced with some of his bravest companions to search whence these sounds came. They saw huge beasts and bizarre shapes with ferocious faces that were tearing at one another and eating each other. The king knew he could not push forward any further. They continued walking until they reached the land of Suluka, where they found a snake of great size and a disproportionate bulk. They saw it lying on the ground, and they believed it to be dead. But when they came to examine it, they realized it was alive. They fled immediately and took care of it by magic. The Copts believed that they charmed the snake, rendered him unable to move, so he remained motionless and died in that place. They say it was a mile long and that it swallowed elephants. The king then came to the city of Alkand, which is the city of sages. The people fled to a high mountain, which they accessed from within their city by roads, where neither the king nor his companions could pass. He laid siege for a long time until the water finally failed and he could find no more anywhere. The companions of the king suffered greatly and were about to die of thirst. One ascetic called Mundus then came to them. He was one of the most prominent among these sages. His hair covered his whole body. He told the king, "O foolish king, what are you looking for here? You already possess all kinds of goods and you have food beyond your needs. Why do you fatigue yourself and your army? Are you not satisfied with what you have? And do you not trust your creator who gave you so much wealth and has placed so much of the world beneath you?" Naurus was astonished at this address and asked the ascetic to give him water. The ascetic, having indicated to him that he would, the king asked where they lived because he could not find in their city a drop of water to drink. He replied, "We live in a place where no one can enter." "And what do you eat?" asked the king. "We eat the roots of plants. The very small amount is enough for our sustenance." "And what do you drink?" "We drink water from ponds that are under the ground and gather their water from rain and snow." "Why do you run away?" "Due to the distaste of your proximity and fear we would be defiled by your contact. We felt horror at your approach. Otherwise, there is nothing we have to fear you." "Where do you take shelter when the sun is too fiery?" "In the caves in the mountain." "Do you need some silver, which I could give you?" "Silver is only useful for the arrogant. We serve it not, and we have enough other things to do without it. Indeed, God has provided us the treasures such as if you saw them, you would judge all others worthless." "Bring them for me to see then," said the king. "Follow me," replied the ascetic. And he took the king with a group of his companions into a large area at the foot of the mountain where goldenrod grew. Then he pointed to the valley whose slopes were very covered with emeralds and turquoise stones. Now Harus ordered his companions to choose the best of these stones and bring them back as many as they could. They obeyed and brought back these treasures to Egypt. The wise man saw some of the king's army who carrying an idol that they worshipped. It grieved him much. He asked the king not to stay in this land. He urged him to abandon the service of idols. Naharus asked him to show him the way back. The sage consented and he bade farewell. The Egyptians then resumed their march in the direction that was given to them in every nation they crossed, and the king left a monument in memory of his visit. He arrived in the land of Nubia. The inhabitants, bringing him treasures, asked for peace. Then he came to Dongala, where he erected a column on which he inscribed his name, details of his itinerary, and all the fact of his journey. While this person had to travel west to get there, Alexander, as they state, had to travel east to get there. So first it talks about the Zanj, and then they talk about the Sea of China. So they cross the Zanj, and then the island of women. This is an island in the limits of the Sea of China. It is reported that it is inhabited only by women who are impregnated by the wind, and the only bear female children, and only bear female children. Gold, according to claims, grow there in canes such as bamboo, and the women are fed with gold. A man once fell among them. They wanted to kill him, but one of them had compassion, set him on a plank, and entrusted it to the sea. Waves and winds carried him to the land of China. He went to the king of China and spoke of the island. The king sent his ships to investigate, but after 3 years of effort, they found neither news nor traces of it. So this is the fullest limits of the East. So here they talk about Alexander reaching the same place. It says Alexander also went to the island of the ascetics. He could see nothing on its soil except grass and ponds. It was inhabited by men exhausted by asceticism and whose skin had turned black like ash. He stopped among them, greeted them, and they returned his salutations. He asked them how they lived in this place. We eat, they said, the fish of the sea, which we take, and various herbs, and drink the water from these ponds. He proposed transporting them to a richer land. They said, what will we do? We have in this same island treasures worth all the rest of the world, which would satisfy anyone who possesses them. And what are these? Asked Alexander. They brought him to the valley, quite dazzling with pearls and hyacinths, which boggled the mind. And from there, they brought him into the vast plain, which produced abundant fruit of species unknown in any other country. Can you lead us then, they said, to a richer place than this? By God, Alexander replied, I do not know one with even half as much. All this, they continued, in our hands, and we will not make us of it. We prefer grass to these fruits. The companions of Alexander wanted to take some precious stones, but but he stopped them. He said goodbye to the men and returned to his ship, amazed. So we can't finish it without talking about the Green Sea. So it says there are reports that they pointed Alexander to the island in the Green Sea on which lived wise men. He went there and saw men wearing pants made of leaves and living in caves. Peace reigned among them. He asked them questions on philosophy, which they answered. Then he asked, ask of me what you wish. They asked him for immortality. Is this something I possess? He said, for I cannot add a single moment to my life. Then help us to know how much time remains for us to live. I do not know the time remaining in my own life. How would I know the time left in yours? Give us at least the blessing that we might live as long as we have already lived. I cannot obtain this blessing for myself. How would I obtain it for another? We will therefore ask, they said, who has the authority to give it? Then they began to view the army of Alexander. There was on shore the sea a potter who did not look up to Alexander or his army. The conqueror was surprised, and approaching him said to him, what is stopping you from rising before me and watching my troops? He replied, your power is nothing that amazes me. Why should I view your men? What do you mean? I saw before you a king whose power exceeded that of any other. Now there was in my neighborhood a poor man possessing nothing. The king and the poor man died. the same day and were buried in the same place. I visited their graves until the coffins were consumed and were the bones which alone remained mingled. Then I tried to distinguish the king from the poor man, and this what I was unable to do. Since that time I have despised kings. The profession that you practice, is it enough to live on? Asked Alexander. I earn 3 dirhams per day, the man replied. I spend a dirham, I pay one in debt, and I save one. The one I spend is for my food and my family's food. The one that I pay in debt is for the lease on my house and my shop. And the one I save is for the education of my child, who will support me when I become old. Alexander asked him if he spent nothing on his companions. He replied, they do not need it, and I need no more of their help. Whoever needs help is one who does not fulfill his duties to himself. Whoever does what he should for himself shall need nothing. Alexander, who admired this wisdom, walked away. So obviously, those stories are a little bit mythological, probably very mythological, and they do not point necessarily to the finding of places. But what they do point to is that these people believed that there must have been other places beyond China, which they thought was the end of the cultivated world, and beyond the Green Sea, which combines on the other side. And as you can see in the story of Alexander from China, from the Black Sea or the Dark Sea, they point him to the islands which are in the Green Sea. So he travels from the Black Sea around the earth to the Green Sea, and there he returns back home. And then, of course, in the other one, the other guy gives up on the Dark Sea because he just was told by the Zanj that it's too far away, which is interesting that he asked the Zanj. And then he travels the other way through the Demdem, which we all know is the people who are located in Senegambia. And then he travels from there into the Green Sea, and basically they say there's people who live there who are not as sophisticated as the people on the other side, but are living an ascetic life, which basically means like living like monks. It's also interesting that they could have chosen any color to represent them, but they chose dark color to represent them as people. Now, whether these stories are fully made up out of nothing, or whether they arc back to some touch of reality, is unknown. Because, of course, a lot of these stories even go back as far as Ptolemy. And Ptolemy does state that if you keep traveling through the eternal islands being those Canary Islands, then you will find another island on the other side, a pyramidical island. This is one of those things that makes us think that the Atlantic Ocean, again, might have been traveled much earlier than we think. No great impact has really been made by traveling this ocean. So all of these stories remain stories. Now, remember, this is 800 AD. Now, I want to remind you that the Akbar Ezamin is incomplete. According to Al Masudi, there were several more stories about people traveling to that area, risking their lives trying to travel through the Atlantic. So we have no idea how many did. And we have no idea if Koshkash is just another one of these mythological stories, or if he is an actual traveler who reached somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much. I try to make it a little bit longer so that I don't just give up on it, which I usually do when it gets to about an hour. I feel a lot of people start going to sleep after that.